Back in the early 2000s, I was a Sims-obsessed kid who also loved movies. You can imagine my excitement when I learned about the game's inbuilt video capture tool, which basically let me create my own movies without leaving my bedroom. It's been a while since I made my last Sims 2 video, and while I never really stopped being obsessed with The Sims as a whole, I kinda grew out of the video making side of it. But recently, I got reminded of how much fun I used to have working on those videos back in the day. All that nostalgia made me think, actually, why not make another Sims video? I wanted the video to be relatively simple, but challenging enough. And of course, as nostalgic as it could get. Recreating Bring Me to Life by Evanescence seemed like the perfect idea. The band, and that song in particular, was the soundtrack to most Sims 2 videos back in the early 2000s. And the concept for the original video, while not overly complex, is very memorable, and recreating it in The Sims sounded like a very interesting challenge. The video is already available on my channel, so if you haven't seen it yet, go check it out, as here I'll be walking you through the process and revealing some behind the scenes tricks and secrets that might spoil the viewing experience if you watch it in reverse order. Before I move on with the rest of the video, I just want to give a quick shout out to It's Just Aaron, whose video inspired me to make this behind the scenes video in the first place. Creating Sims was never my forte, but finding the right clothes proved to be the bigger challenge, which surprised me a lot as the game is literally a time capsule for the early 2000s. Finding period-accurate clothes shouldn't really be an issue. Luckily, Tumblr and Mod The Sims came to the rescue with some nice custom content. The only problem was I couldn't find the right type of jeans for the guy, or to be more precise, to find ones that would go well with the top that I chose for him. I eventually found ones that had just the right shape, but they weren't actually jeans, so I decided to try my luck with CPE and GIMP and swap the non-jeans texture with one I extracted from another piece of custom content. The Sims is a very suburbia-oriented game, and I needed my neighborhood to look like an actual metropolis. Luckily, this time I had no difficulties finding the right custom content. Thanks to the hard work of talented custom content creators, there are so many skyscrapers that can be used as neighborhood decoration. And look, they even light up at night. To make this tall tenement building, I used the Set Highest Allowed Level cheat code, which let me build more floors than the game would normally allow. There is a catch though, as apparently with this many floors, the game struggles to generate ceiling correctly, meaning that in certain shots you would be able to see the sky above Sims' heads. As a quick workaround, I put this photography backdrop on the roof, just so that I could still get some shots done that day. Later, I downloaded these Deco ceiling tiles, which I think were made before ceilings were officially added into the game as a feature. I knew I had to find a way for the Sim to walk along the edge of the building, as the music video wouldn't really make any sense without it. Technically, it's not even that difficult to pull off. As long as you manage to place a Sim on a path that is at least a few tiles long, the Sim will be able to walk along it. But to make it look convincing, I had to make it look like it was an actual architectural detail that would blend naturally with the rest of the building, and not look like an unfinished balcony. I already had some custom cornices in the game, but technically they functioned like a fence that needed to be put on top of the floor, not below it. Well, it could help me make it look a little bit less like an unfinished balcony. That wasn't exactly what I was going for. Figured it might be possible to manually move the 3D mesh so that the game would register it being in one place, but graphically display the object in a different position. I downloaded Blender, and having no idea what I was doing, I just tried moving things around and hoped for the best. Approximately 324 tries later, I managed to align the 3D model exactly how I wanted. Almost exactly, because those so-called endposts that the game generates at the opposing ends of each fence would show up in random places regardless of what I did. I decided to try a different approach. Rather than messing with how fences work by trying to make them behave in a way they were clearly not meant to, I imported the extracted mesh as a wall decoration. In hindsight, had I begun with that idea, I would have saved myself a lot of time and frustration. But in my head, sticking with the same type of object seemed like a less problematic solution. Anyway, at least I found the right solution in the end, and I was able to easily place the cornices anywhere I wanted, and even adjust their height. That way, I was able to position them right below the floor tile, which made it look like the Sim was actually walking on the cornice itself. You might have noticed that there is no floor edge that is normally visible in the game. That is because I downloaded a mod that made that part invisible, as otherwise it would collide with the cornices. Normally, buildings in this game have rather simplistic shapes. To make the building look like it could actually be climbed, I added as many architectural details as I could, some of which I resized and recolored myself. For example, I used these columns to make it look like the exterior walls were thicker than they really were, at the same time making the surface on which the sim was supposed to walk on seem narrower. I wanted to make it clear that the cornice wasn't something a human should be standing on, not to mention strolling along, sleepwalking, or singing and dancing in a trance. I also had to resize the windows, as the ones I had in the game were too small for an adult sim to believably fit through. Resizing the mesh itself was quite easy, as I already had some experience with it at that point. But windows are a bit trickier to work with, because you also need to update this crude-looking PNG file, which basically tells the game where the actual opening in the wall needs to be. There are actually two PNG files, as there's a separate one for diagonal walls, and the proportions for either of them seem completely random. There are some tutorials online on how to do it properly, but here again I just opted for the tried and true method of testing it 300 times until it just looked fine. Why didn't I just use a custom window that happened to have the right size instead, you might ask? We'll get to that later. Once I was done placing all these architectural details and moving them around a few times to find the optimal composition, I realized that the sim wasn't able to walk past them, even though nothing was actually in their way. But you know how sims are when it comes to routing issues. And so do I, so I should have known better. I already had a modded object in my game called Walk Around and Through Blocks, which makes the sim ignore whatever object was placed on it and simply walk through it. Although that meant I had to basically remove everything, place those blocks, and then put everything back. This time on those blocks. And speaking of invisible objects, oh boy. Once I finished working on the building, I had to make sure it was lit properly. That was the most frustrating part of the whole process. And if you notice some lighting issues while watching the video, that might be why. I had these custom lamps which could be turned invisible, which was a great thing as I was able to place them anywhere I wanted and they wouldn't get in the way when I was actually shooting. But to light the facade properly, first I had to make this strange construction made of columns in order for the game to generate floor tiles on which I could place them. Then I had to make each light invisible and remove the columns. It all worked fine until I realized that parts of the set were not lit properly, and I wanted to move those lights around. The problem was, I just couldn't find them. I mean, they were invisible after all. Which was ironic because earlier I had the opposite issue. I used similar invisible lamps to light the interior scenes, and I would just constantly grab them while trying to click on any other object in the room. But here, I tried clicking randomly everywhere, and it was like they weren't there. I had to manually mess with their textures in SimPE. Like, I literally messed these textures up. I just wanted to replace the invisible texture with a visible one. But when I relaunched the game, those textures would flash blue, which is a sign that a texture is either missing or corrupted. But at least they weren't invisible anymore, so joke's on you, game. At last, I was able to start filming. I can't stress how much I had anticipated this moment. The more I got stuck in all this prep work, the more I couldn't shake off the feeling that it was all starting to feel a little bit too much like Ben Wyatt's claymation project.
Oh my god. That's the whole thing. That's 3 weeks of work. You're gonna be okay.
At first, I had no idea how to approach the opening shot. If you're familiar with The Sims 2, you probably understand why this kind of shot might be a challenge. For those who are not, let me quickly explain. In this game, when you open your neighborhood, you can freely move the camera around. But all the buildings, and I mean the actual playable lots like the tenement building that I made, have this simplified pixelated look. When you enter the lot, on the other hand, you can't move the camera too far from the center of that lot. So you can imagine how happy I was when I randomly stumbled upon Let Simmer's camera settings workshop, where he explained that you can essentially remove the distance limit by making a small change to your camera config file. Having done that, I was able to film everything from the lot view in a single shot. So big thanks to Let Simmer. If you don't know his channel, please make sure to check it out as he posts so much great and inspiring stuff. The shot was still time-consuming and difficult to pull off though. My camera movements were set to really slow so that I had more control over the way it moved. But that meant that each take would be around 1 minute long. And there were a lot of takes. It had never occurred to me how much Sims toss and turn when they're asleep. Anytime I had a somewhat decent take, by the time the camera would be inside the apartment, the Sim would be facing the other side or snoring awkwardly. To reduce the amount of movement, I would temporarily pause the game, but I couldn't leave it paused the whole time as there were lots of animated effects like the clouds or fog. Since the shot was long and complex, it was difficult to move the camera in a natural way without messing anything up. To make it easier to stay on track, I saved some strategic positions. For example, I knew I wanted to always start the shot in a specific spot. So when I had my camera ready, I pressed Ctrl+4. This way I was able to quickly move back to the same spot by pressing 4. I still moved the camera manually using the keyboard and mouse, but I used the saved positions to make sure I was reaching the right checkpoints at the right time. Otherwise, it would be a lot more difficult to make the camera fly through the window without accidentally clipping through the wall. Like I mentioned, each take was around 1 minute long, so of course I had to also adjust the timing when editing by speeding certain parts up. I also added a camera shake effect to make it look like the camera was slightly swinging in the wind. When filming scenes with Sims, I use a lot of different animation boxes. They're modded objects that let you select specific animations from the game, but some of them even come with their own custom ones. It's immensely helpful because you don't need the Sim to actually perform any action. You don't need to worry about their mood or whether a Sim would normally be able to perform that interaction in the first place. Although there are a lot of animations to choose from, sometimes you need to improvise. Antisocial Bunny's video on animations was a great source of inspiration for me here. If you haven't come across her channel yet, you really need to check it out. In her video, she explained how to do all sorts of crazy stuff by combining different animations and manipulating the position of a Sim's body or even specific limbs. This helped me shoot the sequence where the Sim is walking out the window. To make it seem like she was standing on the windowsill, I used one of the so-called OSMPs. OSMP stands for One More Spot Please. And they're basically like invisible shelves that can be placed in different spots and at different heights to make it seem like something was placed on a surface that can't normally be used for placing objects in the unmodded game. I also used it in the scene with a party, where I needed to make it look as if the girl was sitting on the windowsill. To make the Sim climb the building, I used an animation from the Bon Voyage expansion pack for when the Sim goes up the crow's nest on the pirate ship. With the help of OSMPs, I was able to adjust the height and make it seem like the Sim was actually grabbing and holding on to the specific parts of the building. A bigger challenge was to replicate the unique way in which Amy Lee moves in the original music video. Her character moves like she's in a trance or sleepwalking, but at the same time she adds this musical flair to it, since it's a music video after all. Sims, on the other hand, walk fast and in a very casual way. To counter this, I used a mod to change the Sims' walk style to that of the young adults, who are apparently programmed by EA to walk like they're lazy college students with no sense of urgency. So, like college students. Since in the original video there are so many scenes of her just walking, I tried my best to intersperse these shots with anything that would make it a little bit more expressive and interesting. The animations I used were, for example, from when a Sim becomes a zombie, is about to faint due to dehydration, or when they're failing at log rolling. You probably get now why using animation boxes makes things a lot easier, especially for the poor Sims who have to act all these things out. For this scene, I needed to show the window being opened. Windows normally don't open in this game, even though there were plans to actually include this feature at some point. There is a mod that unlocks it for a few windows, including the ones I use in this building. This is why I decided to resize those windows rather than look for custom ones online. But wait a minute, if I resized them, wouldn't that mess these animations up? Well, of course it would. But luckily, it wasn't that difficult to fix. First of all, the mod is very well documented, so it was quite easy to understand how everything worked. And second of all, the game doesn't really use specific animations for that, so thankfully, I didn't need to edit anything in Blender this time. The game just needs to know the coordinates of where the moving part should be at the start and at the end of the interaction, and it generates the animation on the fly based on those values. So all I needed to do was update these coordinates in SIMP-E. The scenes where she's hanging from the edge of the building are quite long in the original video, so it was hard to make it not overly repetitive. Just like before, I tried to use as many different animations as I could find. Here I used one from the Military Career Award, but also a few that were exported from a Tomb Raider game. I also made lots of crazy camera moves to try to hide the fact that the guy was putting as much effort into this as if he was fixing a broken sprinkler, because that was basically what he was doing. But hey, it's not like the guy in the original video is significantly better at trying to save her life, right? When it comes to editing, I mostly did some light color correction and grading, which helped me somewhat fix the uneven lighting in certain shots. I used Magic Mask a lot to select specific parts of the shot, which helped me blur the background and create the illusion of depth of field, for example. I also fixed a few graphical errors that I either hadn't spotted during filming or simply didn't have enough patience to go back and reshoot. And some of those I wouldn't have been able to fix anyway. For example, for some reason the top 2 floors were brighter than the rest of the building. I was able to select the area and adjust the brightness manually. Then, the program tracked the movements so that the selection remained where it needed to be, despite all the camera moves. I was also able to paint out one silly error on my part, where I didn't notice that there were 2 microphones in one shot, one in the singer's hand and the other one still on the stand. There are a few errors that actually made their way into the final version of the video because they weren't that big of a deal, and at that stage I would have probably abandoned the project altogether if I had to make any other reshoots. For example, the guitar changes its color from shot to shot because at one point the recolors I had downloaded simply disappear from the game. There's also a scene with a shadow that just doesn't make any sense. It's because in that scene I used some invisible floor tiles, and apparently Sims and objects can still cast shadows on those, so it looks like her shadow is defying the laws of physics. And in this shot, I forgot to turn ceilings on, so if you look closely enough, it looks like the balconies don't have any floor. There are a few visual effects I did in Fusion, which I believe is DaVinci's version of Adobe's After Effects. The effects I created were the gusts of wind that you could see in a few shots, as well as one green screen shot. I avoid green screen as much as I can because I can't seem to be able to produce anything that doesn't look like a 2010 YouTube parody video, but in this case I resorted to it because I needed at least one shot of her falling down that would be more dynamic than what I was able to shoot directly in the game. So basically I recorded her falling down in front of a custom green screen and filmed the background separately. Then I sped the background video up and put the shot of the sim on top of it in Fusion. The guy's reflection was also shot separately, but here no green screen was actually used. When editing, I just rotoscoped him and put him on top of the other shot with some transparency. All in all, I'm really glad that I picked this project up. Sure, there were a lot of frustrating moments, but seeing the video come together was really rewarding in and of itself, and reading your comments about how many memories this video unlocked for you made it even more worth it. There's something beautiful about this game still being able to not only provide so much entertainment after all those years, but to still serve as a creative outlet for so many people. Anyway, I have a lot of ideas for other videos to make in The Sims 2 and about The Sims 2. So if you're curious about any of that, please feel free to subscribe to my channel or leave a like or a comment. It really helps a lot, especially for small channels like mine. Okay, bye.